Imagine you had the opportunity to invest in a revolutionary technology company led by someone many media outlets consider the next Steve Jobs. Furthermore, their primary goal is to bring a portable laboratory to every household in the world, much like what happened with personal computers to make technology serve healthcare and enable early disease diagnosis, all thanks to a few drops of blood. Imagine that among the investors, you find individuals like Oracle's founder Larry Ellison, Rupert Murdoch, the owner of media outlets such as Fox News and The Wall Street Journal, that the company's board of directors includes former secretaries of state Henry Kissinger and George Shultz, and that the person leading the company has received public endorsements from Bill Clinton and Joe Biden, among many other recognized figures and media outlets. Doesn't it sound like a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to you? Well, in reality, you are in front of one of the biggest scams in the history of the United States, and a fraud that Elizabeth Holmes managed to sustain for over 12 years, applying the same principles and ideas that can be found in hundreds of Silicon Valley and tech companies today. Let's look at this interesting story. Elizabeth Holmes was born in 1984 in Washington, D.C., and from a very early age, she displayed her grand ambitions. When asked in class what she wanted to be when she grew up, while most of her peers responded with professions like firefighter, police officer, or scientist, she answered, "A billionaire." In 2002, she began her studies in chemical engineering at Stanford University, one of the world's most prestigious institutions and the alma mater of famous Silicon Valley entrepreneurs like Larry Page, Sergey Brin, and Peter Thiel. Being accepted into this prestigious university and her exceptional performance during her studies started to showcase her intelligence and dedication, earning her the appreciation of Channing Robertson, a high-ranking professor at Stanford who would become the first member of Theranos' board of directors. Elizabeth founded Theranos in 2003 at the age of just 19, using the money her parents had set aside for her education, which she abandoned. She joined the long list of entrepreneurs who left their studies at prestigious universities to dedicate themselves to their companies. The goal of Theranos, which got its name from the combination of the words therapy and diagnosis, was to create a portable laboratory that would automate the processes involved in blood tests, thus reducing costs, time, and human errors. Eventually, it aimed to reach every household so that people could monitor the progression of their health and detect diseases early through quick and easy blood checks, transforming from a snapshot of a person's health to a complete movie. Although many of her professors were skeptical that such a concept could work, Elizabeth Holmes' remarkable ability to sell her idea and make everyone believe that this would be the next Apple or Microsoft allowed her to start raising capital from investors to develop this project. Silicon Valley is full of stories of entrepreneurs who promise products and services that they have not yet developed or that face hundreds of problems and bugs in their functionality. And these kinds of stories date back to one of America's foremost inventors, Thomas Edison, who, for years before creating the first incandescent light bulb, claimed to have it and staged presentations while giving shares of his company to journalists to conceal the truth. Ironically, Theranos' first portable laboratory was given this name, the Edison. The Edison functioned, at least in theory, as follows: a small blood sample was taken from the patient's finger and encapsulated in a small container called a nanotiner, which was then inserted into the Edison, which would yield the results in a short amount of time. While someone familiar with the process would immediately raise several doubts about everything that could go wrong in such a process, most people, including programmers, engineers, or biochemists with little experience, lacked the necessary knowledge to think that something like this was virtually impossible. Those who did have the knowledge were completely blinded by Elizabeth. Furthermore, Silicon Valley's culture lends itself to believing in the impossible, sometimes taken to a dangerous extreme. Despite the Edison not being functional, those involved made great efforts to make it appear functional, at least until they could develop the necessary technology for the results it provided to be genuine and not pre-programmed for demonstrations. In the minds of those involved, it was clear that they didn't believe they were doing anything wrong because they thought it was only a matter of time before they could create this miraculous device, and the investors involved up to that point would understand because they would make a lot of money and no one would lose. If employees began to have doubts about the company and the information being presented to the public or investors because they deemed it unethical, Elizabeth would then step in and, with her vision, quickly persuade everyone involved. Elizabeth Holmes began to cultivate a cult personality that swiftly garnered media attention. In a male-dominated world, the image of a female entrepreneur wanting to change the world was very refreshing, and her extremely deep voice ensured she was never overlooked at any kind of event.
We've reinvented the traditional laboratory infrastructure.
Came in asking if they could do a finger stick, and our team in Arizona called us and said, what do we do?
Of course, this voice was fake and just the tip of the iceberg of Elizabeth's lies, but it served to make her stand out and exude an air of maturity despite being under 30 years old. Furthermore, Elizabeth started dressing like her idol Steve Jobs and became obsessed with her vision to the point of becoming tyrannical, just as Steve Jobs had been at times, as portrayed in documentaries and films. Elizabeth pressured people to work on weekends, and the company often provided special meals for its employees, but deliberately delivered them late to make people spend more time in the office. Moreover, Elizabeth became fixated on certain process details that greatly hindered the development of the technology, much in the style of Steve Jobs, who often assigned tedious tasks to his employees to fulfill his whims, such as painting internal components of computers that no one would see or prioritizing design over functionality, as happened with the iPhone 4 and what became known as Antennagate. But unlike what happened with Apple, Elizabeth's whims prevented the company from developing even a small part of what was initially envisioned. Firstly, Elizabeth's fear of needles compelled the technology to work with just a few drops of blood extracted from the finger rather than veins, where a larger volume of blood can be drawn for traditional laboratory tests. Secondly, the size of the Edison. Elizabeth wanted it to be roughly the size of a personal computer. But when so many functions are packed into a small space, the temperature rises, which alters the results. Despite her employees' insistence on prioritizing functionality over these details, Elizabeth held her ground, which also served as a marketing tactic by inventing a close relationship with a distant uncle who died of cancer.
I grew up spending summers and the holidays with my uncle. I remember how much he loved the beach. I remember how much I loved him. He was diagnosed one day with skin cancer, which all of a sudden was brain cancer, and in his bones. He didn't live to see his son grow up, and I never got to say goodbye.
Thanks to her marketing prowess, Elizabeth was able to exploit one of the most profitable emotions in investing, at least for those who use it, not for those who experience it, the fear of missing out, also known as FOMO. This strategy involves capitalizing on investors' fear of missing out on a great investment opportunity. Amidst so many stories of people who invested at the right time in companies like Apple, Tesla, Amazon, Bitcoin, and others, many investors spend their time searching for the next big opportunity. With the media attention she was receiving, her captivating personality, and the public support she was garnering, investors were flocking to Theranos, valuing the company at $10 billion and Elizabeth Holmes amassing a personal fortune of over $4 billion. But this not only helped attract capital, but also secured significant deals that would serve as endorsements to attract even more capital, much like a bubble. Notoriety brings in investments. The company has more money to expand, attracting even more investors and acquiring more and more capital. The primary business move that Theranos would make would eventually mark the beginning of its downfall: wellness centers and Walgreens. Walgreens is a company that operates pharmacy chains in the United States, and through this deal, Theranos began to gain enormous visibility and become known to the general public beyond Silicon Valley. This elevated Elizabeth Holmes to the height of her celebrity status, but also set the company on the path to its eventual demise. Because when people went to Walgreens, not only did they have to undergo blood draws with a needle for most of the required tests, but they also did not receive their results quickly, effectively making it just like any other laboratory. The problem was that since the Edison device wasn't functional, the blood samples were taken to Theranos laboratories in Palo Alto, where they were examined using standard laboratory machinery. Of the hundreds of tests that Theranos promised, they were only capable of performing a portion in their labs, and only a few on the Edison. To make matters worse, Theranos' laboratory was not very reliable, and both the tests performed on the Edison and on equipment from other companies often produced absurd results. This was the breaking point for many of the employees involved. Promoting software with bugs or hardware with lower power than promised was one thing, which is quite common in Silicon Valley and the tech world. However, making promises that had the potential to impact people's health decisions, potentially even causing deaths, was a completely different matter. A false negative could lead someone to believe they didn't have a disease or infection they actually had.
If 100 people who had syphilis came and got tested on the Theranos devices, we would only tell 65 of them that they had syphilis, and we would tell the other 35, you're healthy, no need for medical intervention. So if people are testing themselves for syphilis using Theranos, there's gonna be a lot more syphilis in this world.
But whenever an employee raised such a complaint, they were fired or threatened, with Theranos employing David Boies and the threat of a lawsuit as a means to intimidate any employees who even contemplated going public with the reality of what was happening within the company. David Boies was highly recognized and feared for having won a case against Microsoft on behalf of the Department of Justice, representing Vice President Al Gore in his lawsuit against the presidential election that saw George Bush elected. Additionally, he served as Harvey Weinstein's lawyer in his attempt to silence the women who accused him. This made any attorney that employees consulted recommend signing whatever Theranos requested to avoid an endless legal battle. However, eventually, customer dissatisfaction with their results, the breach of the promise not to use needles, high employee turnover due to ethical concerns within the company, questions from scientists and doctors, and investors' impatience for actual product demonstrations led to the story leaking to the Wall Street Journal, where John Carreyrou began an extensive investigation to uncover the truth. Gathering information was not easy for Carreyrou, as Theranos kept close watch over many of its former employees, threatening them to retract their testimonies or refuse to speak with the journalist. They even went as far as pressuring their superiors and asking Rupert Murdoch, one of Theranos' investors and an owner of the Wall Street Journal, to intervene in order to prevent the publication of the investigation, which Murdoch declined to do. With the publication of John Carreyrou's articles in the Wall Street Journal, Theranos suffered its final blow as it could not effectively refute the accusations made against the company. A slew of lawsuits, coupled with regulatory investigations, depleted the company's remaining resources, causing it to lose its deal with Walgreens and its license to operate its laboratories. In 2018, Theranos was ultimately dissolved, and Elizabeth Holmes was charged with fraud and conspiracy, while John Carreyrou received significant recognition for helping expose this fraud, a story documented in the book Bad Blood and serving as the primary source for this video. Theranos ended up epitomizing much of what Silicon Valley represents, one of the most innovative places in the world, where people are not told that their dreams are impossible or that they are too young to achieve them. But it is also a place where ethical boundaries are often crossed, and investors must be extremely cautious and maintain a level head when dealing with the expectations, projections, and dreams of executives. They should always keep their feet on the ground and avoid overpaying for figures that may not materialize, using cases like this as examples of why skepticism is crucial when investing in the next Apple, Google, or Tesla. If you enjoyed the video and want to support the channel, please subscribe and share this content to reach more people who can benefit from learning this story. You might also enjoy watching our Enron story next.